congratulations. You've just become one of the most sought-after knights in the realm. Tournament champion, skilled warrior, holder of lands. The kind of knight that nobles want in their service, other knights want as ally, and, let's be honest, many ladies find remarkably interesting despite the smell. But being a popular medieval knight isn't just glory and attention. It's years of brutal training, complex social obligations, genuine danger in combat, administrative responsibilities nobody tells you about, and navigating a world where your reputation can be destroyed by a single mistake. It's real work with real consequences. This is what it actually meant to be a medieval knight. Not the Hollywood version. The historical reality, challenging, meaningful, and surprisingly complex. The page years, foundation of knighthood. The journey to knighthood began at age 7, when noble boys were sent to other lords' castles as pages. This wasn't abandonment, it was essential education. Training at home meant staying comfortable and learning limited skills. Training elsewhere meant transformation into something more. Pages learned comprehensive skills preparing them for knightly life. Manners and etiquette were fundamental. How to behave at formal occasions, how to address nobles properly, how to navigate complex social situations without causing offense. These weren't trivial concerns. In a world where honor and reputation mattered enormously, proper behavior was survival skill. Reading and writing were taught to pages, making them literate in an era when most people weren't. This education set knights apart from common soldiers. They could read correspondence, understand legal documents, engage in administrative duties. Literacy was practical necessity for anyone who would eventually manage estates and serve in political capacities. Religious education was extensive. Pages attended services, learned prayers, studied theology. Knights were expected to be Christian warriors, and faith was genuine for most. The religious component of knighthood wasn't just ceremonial. It shaped how knights understood their role in society and their responsibilities to others. Music and cultural education were also included. Pages learned to appreciate poetry, understand courtly behavior, recognize quality in art and performance. This wasn't frivolous. Knights moved in noble circles where cultural sophistication was expected. A knight who could discuss poetry or appreciate music was more valuable than one who could only fight. Physical training started simply. Running to build endurance, climbing to build strength, wrestling to learn leverage and body mechanics, swimming, if facilities existed, wooden practice swords, teaching basic strikes, blocks, and footwork. Young bodies were gradually conditioned for future demands without being pushed beyond age-appropriate limits. Pages also began learning horse care and handling. War horses were expensive, valuable animals requiring expert care. Pages learned feeding schedules, grooming techniques, how to recognize signs of illness or injury, how to approach and handle horses safely. This knowledge was foundational. A knight's life often depended on his horse's condition and training. Service at table was another crucial element. Pages served meals to lords, ladies, and resident knights. This wasn't menial service, it was observational education. They watched how nobles interacted, how decisions were made, how disputes were resolved, how leadership functioned. They learned by watching masters demonstrate skills they'd need later. The castle became their world and classroom simultaneously. Every area held lessons. The chapel taught faith and ceremony. The great hall taught social dynamics and politics. The kitchen taught logistics. Feeding hundreds required organization and planning. The armory taught equipment care. The stables taught animal management. Everything was interconnected education. Relationships between pages created informal hierarchy based on experience and capability. Older pages mentored younger ones, passing down knowledge that formal training didn't cover. Where supplies were kept. Which routes through castle were fastest. How different knights preferred things done. This peer-to-peer knowledge transfer was an essential part of education. Competition existed naturally among pages, but it was generally constructive. Boys competed in training, in serving duties, in academic pursuits, but they learned quickly that competition shouldn't destroy cooperation. Knights needed to work together in battle and in service. Developing those cooperative habits young made sense. The best pages helped each other improve rather than hoping others would fail. Character development was emphasized constantly. Honor wasn't just discussed, it was practiced daily. Telling truth even when lies would be easier. Taking responsibility for mistakes rather than blaming others. Treating people with respect regardless of their rank. Keeping promises. Maintaining loyalty. These weren't abstract concepts, but daily expectations with real consequences when violated. Discipline was firm but measured. Pages who misbehaved faced punishment. Physical punishment was standard for serious offenses, but social consequences often stung worse. Being known as dishonest or dishonorable was mark that lasted. Other pages avoided association. Knights dismissed them from consideration for advancement. Reputation mattered enormously, and damaged reputation was nearly impossible to rebuild. But there were also good times. Pages played when training and duties allowed. Games involving running, throwing, mock combat. Stories told in evening hours. Tales of legendary knights, famous battles, heroic deeds that inspired and entertained. The bonds formed during these years often lasted lifetimes. Boys who trained together became men who fought together and remained friends throughout their lives. The page years typically lasted until age 14. By then, boys had transformed significantly. Bodies had grown stronger. Minds had developed. Skills had been acquired. They'd learned the foundations of what knighthood meant. They were ready for the next phase, ready to become squires and begin serious preparation for knighthood itself. The squire years, intensive preparation. At 14, pages became squires, assigned to specific knights as personal attendants and students. This apprenticeship relationship defined the next 7 years. A squire served his knight closely, learning through observation, instruction, and hands-on experience everything needed to become a knight himself. Squires' responsibilities were extensive and demanding. They woke before their knights to prepare everything needed for the day. Armor had to be readied, cleaned overnight, checked for damage, all pieces organized and accessible. Weapons required preparation, blades sharpened to proper edge, hafts checked for cracks, everything oiled and maintained. Horses needed tending, fed, groomed, exercised, their tack inspected and repaired as needed. Armor maintenance alone was substantial undertaking. A full suit of plate armor consisted of dozens of pieces, each requiring regular attention. Metal had to be cleaned thoroughly and oiled to prevent rust. Leather straps had to be conditioned to prevent cracking. Joints had to be checked for wear. Dents had to be hammered out carefully. This wasn't busy work. Poorly maintained armor could fail in combat, killing the wearer. Squires learned that attention to detail meant difference between life and death. Weapons care required similar diligence. Swords needed sharpening, but not to excessive edge. Extremely sharp blades were brittle and chipped easily. Proper edge geometry had to be maintained. Balance had to be preserved. Grinding unevenly could ruin blades' handling characteristics. Lances had to be inspected for cracks that could cause catastrophic failure during impact. Shields required repairs to straps and padding. Every piece of equipment was significant investment and potentially life-saving tool. But squires weren't just servants. They were students receiving intensive education. Knights taught combat skills far beyond page-level training. Real swordplay with real weapons. Lance technique, preparing for jousting. Mounted combat requiring simultaneous control of horse and weapons. Wrestling and grappling relevant in close combat situations. Every skill practiced repeatedly until it became automatic response rather than conscious action. Training intensity increased dramatically from page years. Hours of practice daily. Wooden practice weapons were replaced by real arms, heavier, better balanced, requiring more strength and finer control. Protective gear was worn during training because injuries were expected part of preparation. Bruises accumulated constantly. Broken bones happened occasionally. This was accepted cost of proper training. Better to learn through injury and practice than die from inexperience in real combat. Mounted combat training was particularly demanding. War horses were large, powerful animals trained to be aggressive in battle. Learning to control such a horse while wearing armor and wielding weapons required years of practice. Squires had to master riding at various speeds, controlling horse with legs and weight shifts, while hands were occupied with weapons, maintaining balance during violent maneuvers. The quinton was standard training equipment, a wooden post with rotating arm. Hit the target on one end, and the weighted bag on the other end swung around. If you weren't fast enough after striking, the bag hit you back. This taught timing, accuracy, and the critical importance of speed after committing to an attack. Every squire got hit by the quintain repeatedly during training. It was a humbling reminder that combat had consequences for slow reactions. Squires accompanied their knights to tournaments, initially as observers and support, eventually as participants in squire competitions. These experiences were invaluable. No amount of practice could replace watching actual combat, understanding the chaos, feeling the pressure, observing how experienced knights handled intense situations. Squires who'd seen tournaments before participating in them had significant advantage over those learning during their first actual competition. The knight-squire relationship often became deeply meaningful. Many knights remembered their own squire years, the struggles, the fears, the determination required. Good knights mentored with patience and wisdom, pushing squires to excel while supporting them through inevitable failures. They shared stories during long journeys or quiet evenings. When I was squire, these weren't just stories but lessons wrapped in narrative, wisdom disguised as entertainment. Some knights were harsher mentors, demanding perfection, quick to punish mistakes, seemingly impossible to satisfy. But even these difficult relationships usually had purpose. They were preparing squires for life and death situations where mistakes meant death. The intensity, while sometimes excessive, came from genuine desire to ensure survival. Squires might resent harsh treatment initially, but often appreciated it later when that training saved their lives. Brotherhood among squires was a powerful force. They trained together daily, competed constantly, suffered through same demands, celebrated small victories together. The bonds formed during squire years often lasted entire lifetimes. These weren't just friends. They were brothers in arms who would fight beside each other, trust each other in combat, support each other through everything life brought. Competition among squires was fierce but generally respectful. Everyone wanted to prove themselves, to be recognized as skilled, to earn knighthood through demonstrated excellence. But they also understood that fellow squires were future comrades. Today's rival in practice yard was tomorrow's ally in battle. Competition pushed everyone to improve without destroying essential cooperation. By age 21, after 7 years of intensive training and service, squires had been completely transformed. Physically hardened through constant training and labor, highly skilled in combat from years of practice, knowledgeable about equipment from daily maintenance responsibilities, experienced from tournaments and possibly even warfare, mentally prepared for the responsibilities ahead. Those who'd proven themselves, shown skill, courage, loyalty, and honor, would be recommended by their knights for dubbing. This wasn't automatic. Some squires never achieved knighthood, lacking necessary qualities, but those who succeeded felt immense pride. Years of work culminating in life-changing ceremony. The knighting ceremony, sacred transformation. The knighting ceremony was one of the most profound moments in a person's life. Not merely celebration, but transformation. Not simply recognition, but acceptance of sacred responsibilities. Everything trained for, everything worked toward, culminating in ritual that changed identity forever. Preparation began the evening before with the vigil, a night spent in prayer in the chapel. This wasn't casual religious observance, but serious spiritual preparation. The soon-to-be knight would kneel in the chapel, often alone, reflecting deeply on what knighthood meant. Tomorrow life would fundamentally change. Tomorrow new responsibilities would begin. Tomorrow becoming someone different. The vigil provided time to prepare mentally and spiritually for that transformation. The night was long and physically uncomfortable, kneeling on cold stone floors, back and knees aching, fighting exhaustion while trying to maintain focus on prayer and contemplation. This physical challenge was intentional. It tested commitment and provided time for genuine reflection. Thoughts during vigil were supposed to focus on honor, courage, duty, and faith. What these concepts meant, whether one possessed necessary qualities, whether one could fulfill the obligations being accepted. Mourning brought ritual bathing, symbolic cleansing representing purity, a new beginning. Fresh white garments were donned, symbolizing that purity. These weren't casual clothing choices, but meaningful elements of sacred ceremony. Everything about the knighting ritual carried symbolic weight, connecting the individual to centuries of tradition and to the divine mandate that knights understood as foundation of their authority. This ceremony itself took place publicly, usually in the Great Hall with the entire castle community present. Lords, ladies, knights, squires, pages, household members, visiting nobles, everyone gathered to witness. This wasn't private moment, but community event. The community was witnessing and affirming the new knight's entry into their ranks, accepting him as peer and brother. The candidate knelt before the lord or knight, performing the dubbing. Sometimes multiple knights participated, each touching the candidate's shoulders with a sword, the physical act that gave the ceremony its name. Sometimes a single knight performed the entire ceremony. Regardless of specifics, the moment carried profound weight. This was transformation being enacted through ritual. Oaths were central to the ceremony. The candidates swore to uphold specific commitments, to defend the weak and innocent, to uphold justice, to serve faithfully, to maintain honor, to protect the church, to be courageous in battle, to be loyal to Lord and companions. These weren't empty words. They were binding commitments that would define identity and behavior going forward. Knights took these oaths seriously, understanding they were accepting responsibilities that would shape their entire lives. Prayers were offered asking divine blessing on the new knight and his future endeavors. Medieval society was deeply religious, and knighthood was understood as sacred calling as well as military role. Knights were warriors, yes, but also servants of God, expected to use their power righteously and in accordance with divine will. Then came the transformative moment itself. Rise, Sir Name. Those words changed everything. The title, the new identity, no longer squire, now knight. The weight of that word, of that change, was overwhelming in the best possible way. Years of work validated, new status achieved, new identity assumed, everything different from this moment forward. The newly dubbed knight received his spurs. Golden spurs for knights, silver for squires, marking the distinction clearly and visibly. These weren't merely decorative. They were functional equipment and status symbols simultaneously. Wearing spurs identified someone as a knight immediately and unmistakably anywhere in medieval Europe. A sword was often presented during the ceremony. Sometimes the knight's own blade, blessed for the occasion. Sometimes a new sword given as gift from the lord or family. The sword represented knightly authority and responsibility. With this weapon came power to defend and duty to use that power righteously in accordance with the oaths just taken. The ceremony concluded with celebration. Feasting followed, special foods, fine ale or wine, abundance reflecting the occasion's importance, music and entertainment. Congratulations from everyone present, fellow knights welcoming new member to their ranks, family members beaming with pride if they were present, the entire community celebrating together because this was community event. A new knight meant another defender, another leader, another person committed to the community's welfare. For the newly knighted, emotions were overwhelming and complex. Pride in achievement, relief that years of training had been validated, excitement for future opportunities, nervousness about new responsibilities, gratitude toward those who'd trained and supported them, joy at finally reaching this goal. All of these feelings mixing into profound emotional experience that would be remembered forever, in detail, for the rest of their lives. But underlying everything was awareness that this wasn't end point. It was beginning. The ceremony wasn't finish line but starting line. Everything before had been preparation. Now came actual service, actual challenges, actual test of whether training and character were sufficient for the demands ahead. Tournaments, proving grounds, and social events. Tournaments were where knights proved their skills, earned reputations, won prizes, and gained social recognition. These weren't just entertainment, though they certainly provided that. They were training grounds for actual warfare. Combat techniques practiced in tournaments applied directly to battlefield situations. Experience handling pressure and chaos in tournaments prepared knights for real combat's intensity. The tournament circuit was structured system spanning regions. Major tournaments attracted knights from multiple territories. News of upcoming tournaments spread through networks of knights and nobles. Invitations were issued. Preparations began weeks in advance. Successful tournament participation required not just skill but also logistics, transporting armor, weapons, horses, and support personnel to tournament locations. Arriving at tournaments was an impressive sight. Knights came with their households. Colorful pavilions displaying family heraldry were erected. Squires rushed around preparing equipment. War horses were exercised and evaluated. Knights assessed competition, renewed friendships with knights from other territories, engaged in friendly rivalries that sometimes weren't entirely friendly. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and competitive energy. Preparation for tournament combat was extensive. Armor had to be donned piece by piece. Legs first, then torso, arms, gauntlets, finally helmet, each segment requiring careful adjustment and securing. Squires knew their knight's armor intimately, understanding exactly how each piece fit, which straps needed tightening, where padding prevented chafing. The process typically took an hour or more and required close collaboration between knight and squire. Wearing full armor was experience that modern people struggle to comprehend. The weight, typically 30 kilograms or more, was distributed across the body but still exhausting to move in. Every movement required additional effort. The restriction was significant. Joints were limited by metal, flexibility dramatically reduced, simple actions becoming complex operations. The sensory isolation was profound. Vision limited to narrow eye slits, hearing muffled, trapped hot air making breathing labored, communication difficult. Jousting was tournament's premier attraction. Two armored knights on war horses charged at each other with lances, each trying to strike opponent's shield or body with enough force to unseat him or shatter the lance spectacularly. The lances were constructed to splinter on impact, absorbing energy that might otherwise cause serious injury, but the force was still tremendous. Getting hit felt like being struck by a fast-moving vehicle. Even with armor absorbing much of the impact, the jarring force often broke ribs, caused concussions, and always left massive bruises. The actual joust happened remarkably quickly. Sitting on a powerful war horse, lance couched firmly under arm, watching opponent approaching rapidly from opposite end of the list, aiming for center of his shield or body, bracing for imminent collision. Then impact, explosive, disorienting, the world suddenly spinning or tilting, either remaining mounted, lance shattered, controlling a now agitated horse, or falling heavily to the ground while wearing 30 kilograms of metal. Falling felt exactly as unpleasant as imagined and sometimes worse. Victory brought tangible rewards. Prize money was real concern. Tournaments provided income for knights without substantial land holdings. Captured equipment, armor, weapons, horses, could be claimed from defeated opponents who yielded. Sometimes prizes were offered by tournament sponsors, but beyond material rewards, victory brought reputation. Tournament success was how knights built names. Sir Robert, who won the tournament at Ashford. That recognition opened doors, brought offers of service, established standing among peers. The melee was other major tournament event, group combat with multiple knights fighting simultaneously. Less organized than jousting, more chaotic, it more closely resembled actual battle conditions. Knights fought in teams or in free-for-all format depending on tournament rules. The objective was typically to capture opponents through defeat and force surrender rather than to injure seriously, though accidents certainly happened. Melee combat was exhausting beyond what most modern people can imagine. Fighting in armor against even a single opponent was extremely demanding. against multiple enemies, having to watch all directions, coordinating with allies, trying to achieve objectives while avoiding defeat. It was physically and mentally draining. Knights emerged from melees completely spent, soaked with sweat inside their armor, every muscle aching, often with additional bruises and minor injuries. Tournament injuries were common and sometimes serious. Broken bones from falls or impacts, concussions from lance strikes to helmets, deep bruises that lasted weeks, occasionally worse. Tournaments could be fatal despite safety measures like blunted weapons and rules against certain techniques. Every knight understood and accepted these risks. Proving oneself required risk. Glory demanded courage. The possibility of injury or death was part of the challenge being accepted. Evening after tournaments brought different form of competition. Social competition. Castle feasts hosted everyone who'd participated. Knights who'd been trying to unseat each other hours earlier now dined together, drinking, telling stories, exaggerating achievements, diplomatically downplaying defeats. This social aspect was as important as the martial competition itself. Tournament victory changed everything for a knight, especially in social dynamics. Winning brought more than prizes and reputation, it brought attention. A knight fresh from tournament victory, covered in glory, became remarkably interesting to many people. Lords noticed skilled fighters and considered employment offers. Other knights remembered impressive performances and wanted alliances. And ladies, well, ladies noticed successful warriors. The attention from ladies was real and sometimes complicated. After significant victories, knights might receive tokens, scarves, ribbons, small favors from multiple ladies. Some tokens came with names attached. Others arrived anonymously, creating pleasant mysteries. A successful knight might find himself with several tokens and no clear protocol for handling the situation diplomatically. Sir Robert experienced this directly after winning a major tournament. 7 different tokens arrived. 7 from 7 different ladies. Some he knew, some he didn't. Some were unmarried and age-appropriate. Others were very much married, making their interest diplomatically challenging. His squire asked how he planned to handle this situation. Robert's answer was honest, very carefully and probably not perfectly. The token situation created social complexity. Knights were expected to acknowledge ladies who'd honored them with tokens, but how? Wearing all tokens simultaneously sent confusing message. Choosing one over others created offense. The courtly love system provided framework for this, but framework and reality didn't always align neatly. Knights learned to navigate these situations with varying degrees of success. Sir Thomas, despite being walking disaster in many ways, somehow attracted attention at tournaments. His combat skills were genuine. He won consistently, but his social skills were questionable. His personal habits were concerning, and his tendency to fall asleep in food was legendary. Yet after tournament victories, ladies expressed interest. The phenomenon baffled everyone, including Thomas himself. When asked about his success with ladies, he'd shrug and say, "Tournament victories apparently make up for a lot." He wasn't wrong. Sir William took a different approach. He was strategic about everything, including social dynamics. He'd identify which ladies were most politically advantageous before tournaments even began. His token acknowledgements were calculated diplomatic moves. His poetry discussions were carefully planned. Everything was strategy. This approach was effective but also somewhat exhausting. Not every knight wanted to treat social life like military campaign, but William proved it could work. The feasting after tournaments was a significant event. Multiple courses served over hours, roasted meats, fine wines, entertainment. Knights ate and drank substantially. The celebrations often lasted until dawn. Drinking was generous. Wine and ale flowed freely. Most knights were thoroughly intoxicated by evening's end, which was traditional and expected. Their first major celebration after tournament victory often involved spectacular drinking that they'd remember poorly, but others would describe in detail for years. Stories told at these feasts became legend. Tournament mishaps were recounted with increasing embellishment. Remember when Sir Geoffrey's lance shattered and hit the Lord's banner? I heard it nearly hit the Lord himself. I heard it did hit the Lord. The story evolved with each telling, becoming more dramatic and entertaining. while the actual participant would protest weakly that it wasn't quite that dramatic, knowing nobody was interested in accurate version when entertaining version was available. Alliances were forged at these social gatherings. Knights who'd impressed each other in combat would discuss working together in future. Older knights would approach promising younger knights with mentorship offers. Political connections were made over wine and shared laughter. Business was conducted, but casual, friendly business between people who'd just proven their worth to each other through combat. Employment opportunities often emerged from tournament success. Lords attended tournaments specifically to identify skilled knights worth hiring. A knight who performed exceptionally well might receive multiple offers. Position in a powerful lord's household. Command of garrison. Administrative role with good income. Tournament success translated directly to career advancement for knights without substantial inherited lands. Dual castle life. Duties beyond combat. Between tournaments and military campaigns, knights lived in castles or manor houses, and daily life involved much more than just fighting. Certainly there was regular training. Martial skills required constant maintenance. Physical conditioning couldn't be allowed to lapse. But knights also carried administrative, judicial, and social responsibilities that consumed significant time and energy. Mornings typically began with attendance at chapel services. Knights were expected to be visibly pious, demonstrating Christian faith through regular worship. Prayer services also served social function, bringing castle community together, reinforcing shared values and hierarchical relationships. Religious observance wasn't just personal devotion, but public duty that knights were expected to fulfill consistently. Training followed prayer. Even experienced knights practiced daily, maintaining muscle memory and physical conditioning. Weapon skills required regular practice to keep sharp. New techniques needed to be learned as combat evolved. Younger knights and squires required instruction from experienced warriors. The training yard was constantly active with knights of various ages and skill levels, working on different aspects of combat readiness. For knights who held lands, and many did as payment for military service, administrative responsibilities were extensive and unavoidable. Estates needed management. Agricultural production had to be overseen, crop selection, planting schedules, harvest organization. Resources had to be allocated efficiently. Tenants' disputes required resolution. Tax collection had to be organized and enforced. Account keeping was necessary for anyone with property and income. Judicial duties fell to knights with territorial authority. They resolved disputes among people living on their lands, enforced their lords' laws within their jurisdictions, made judgments about guilt and appropriate punishments. This wasn't ceremonial. Knights wielded real legal authority, and their decisions directly affected people's lives. Good knights took this responsibility seriously, attempting to render fair justice. Poor knights abused power, creating resentment and instability. Social obligations consumed considerable time. Court attendance was often required. Knights needed to be present at their lord's court, participating in ceremonies, demonstrating loyalty, maintaining visibility and relationships. Networking was essential. Who you knew mattered enormously. Who liked you, who owed favors, who remembered your service, who could be counted on for support. All of this was political currency that required careful cultivation. Marriage for knights was typically arranged based on political or economic considerations rather than personal attraction. Families negotiated marriages to create alliances, consolidate lands, or improve social positions. But arranged marriages weren't necessarily loveless. Many developed into genuine partnerships. Husbands and wives worked together, managing estates, raising children, navigating complex social obligations. Partnership between husband and wife was practical necessity, as much as emotional connection. Wives of knights had substantial responsibilities of their own. Managing households was complex operation requiring organizational skills and attention to detail. They oversaw servants, managed supplies, ensured the castle or manor house functioned properly. They hosted guests, maintaining social connections and family reputation. They often managed estates when husbands were absent for military service. Noble women weren't decorative. They were active partners in family enterprises. Children born to knights began their own training young, continuing the cycle. Sons were sent to be pages around age 7, just as their fathers had been. Daughters received education appropriate for noble women, household management, social skills, religious instruction. Family legacy mattered enormously. Knights wanted their children to maintain or improve family standing. Reputation was inheritance as important as land or wealth. Feasting was a regular feature of castle life, not just at special occasions but as routine social activity. Evening meals in the great hall brought together castle community, lords, ladies, knights, important visitors, household officials. Shared meals reinforced social bonds, allowed information exchange, provided entertainment through music and storytelling. These weren't casual dinners, but structured social events where seating arrangements indicated status and relationships. The meals themselves were substantial when resources allowed. Multiple courses, roasted meats when available, bread, vegetables, wine or ale depending on status and availability. Knights ate communally, sharing dishes, engaging in conversation, observing social dynamics. These meals were where much of castle's social and political business happened informally, relationships maintained, alliances discussed, information shared. Entertainment during feasts included music from resident or traveling musicians, stories told by skilled raconteurs, occasionally performances by entertainers passing through. Knights participated in this entertainment culture as well, expected to contribute to the evening's enjoyment through conversation, wit, or their own stories from tournaments and campaigns. Courtly love was a complex social system that governed romantic expression in noble circles. Understanding this system was essential for knights moving in noble society. It provided framework for interactions between knights and noble ladies that was elaborate, formalized, and often quite different from actual romantic relationships. The basic structure involved a knight declaring devotion to a lady, typically one of higher social rank and often married. He would write poetry for her, dedicate tournament victories to her, wear her favor in combat, perform deeds in her honor. She would acknowledge his devotion with smiles, kind words, small tokens of appreciation. This could be purely formal social game, genuine emotional connection, or something between those extremes. The system served multiple functions. It provided way for knights to demonstrate cultural sophistication beyond martial skills. It created social entertainment that entire court could observe and discuss. It allowed emotional expression within structured, socially acceptable bounds. And sometimes it created cover for relationships that went beyond the system's official boundaries. Poetry was an expected component of courtly love, and this created problems for many knights. Writing good poetry required skills most knights simply didn't possess. They were trained for combat, not composition. The results of knights attempting poetry were often unfortunate. "Your eyes are like stars" was common starting point, but many knights couldn't develop the metaphor beyond that basic comparison. Your eyes are like stars. They shine. Stars shine. Eyes shine. This is good poetry. The solution was pragmatic. Hire someone to write poetry for you. Traveling poets made good living writing verses for romantically incompetent knights. The knight would provide basic information. Lady's name, her notable features, specific message desired, and the poet would craft actual poetry that didn't cause listeners to wince. The knight would then present this as his own work. Everyone knew this happened. Most ladies probably suspected their knights weren't actually writing the poetry, but maintaining the fiction was part of the game. Sir Robert admitted years later that he'd never written a single poem himself. Every verse presented to every lady over decades was purchased from a poet he'd befriended early in his career. The poet made reliable income. Robert made good impressions. The ladies received poetry that was actually pleasant to hear. Everyone benefited from the arrangement. Some knights tried to write their own poetry with disastrous results that became entertaining stories. Sir Geoffrey once presented a poem to Lady Catherine that compared her to a horse. He meant it as compliment. Horses were valuable, beautiful, strong. Lady Catherine was not flattered. The poem's specific line, "Your hair flows like a well-groomed mane," became legendary example of what not to do. Geoffrey never wrote poetry again and happily paid poets thereafter. The social intrigue surrounding courtly love could be elaborate. Multiple nights might be devoted to the same lady, creating competition that everyone watched with interest. Ladies sometimes encouraged this competition, enjoying the attention and power it gave them. Their husbands often tolerated or even encouraged their wives' courtly admirers. Understanding it raised family status to have successful knights seeking their wives' favor. But sometimes situations became genuinely complicated. Knights developing real feelings for ladies they were supposed to be merely honoring formally. Ladies reciprocating those feelings. Spouses deciding they didn't appreciate the arrangement after all. These complications created drama that entertained entire castle communities for months. Who was really devoted? Who was playing games? Who was offended? Who would challenge whom? The social dynamics were intricate and fascinating. Private meetings between knights and ladies happened, sometimes innocent and sometimes not. What occurred in castle's private chambers during evening hours was theoretically nobody's business. Practically everyone knew or thought they knew what was happening. As long as legitimate heirs weren't questioned and reasonable discretion was maintained, considerable flexibility existed. Medieval society was more pragmatic about these arrangements than often assumed. Knights also engaged in other leisure activities during castle life. Games were popular: chess, dice, cards when they became available. These weren't just pastimes, but also social activities that could be competitive. Some knights gambled on games, occasionally more than was wise. Stakes could escalate quickly when honor and competition were involved. Drinking was a regular feature of social life. Wine and ale were consumed daily, sometimes substantially. Knights drank at meals, during social gatherings, in taverns when available. This wasn't considered problematic unless someone became unable to fulfill duties. Hangovers during training were common enough that everyone just accepted them as normal condition of life. The castle's social calendar included religious festivals and holy days that brought breaks from routine. Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, various saints' days, each brought special services, feasting, celebration. Knights participated fully in these observances, not just from personal faith, but as community leaders expected to set examples and maintain traditions. The reality of battle, courage, and chaos. When war came, and it came regularly in medieval Europe, knights faced their ultimate test. All training, all preparation, all development led to actual combat, where death was real possibility and courage was necessity, not aspiration. Battle was what knighthood was ultimately about. Pre-battle preparation was thorough and methodical. Armor was checked obsessively, every strap tested, every joint inspected, everything secured properly because failure meant death. Weapons were sharpened, blessed, prepared. Horses were inspected carefully. A lame horse or damaged tack could be fatal. Squires worked frantically ensuring everything was perfect. Knights reviewed battle plans, understood their positions in formations, knew their roles and responsibilities. The approach to battle was psychologically difficult. Waiting in armor, tense with anticipation, unable to do anything but wait. Commanders gave final instructions. Priests offered blessings, reminding knights that they fought for righteous causes. Knights checked equipment one final time. Some prayed quietly. Some joked to ease tension. Most stayed silent, lost in their own thoughts about what was coming. When battle began, training took over. Years of preparation meant that actions were automatic, not requiring conscious thought. Knights moved into assigned positions in formations. They maintained spacing from fellow knights. They watched for signals from commanders. They controlled excited, nervous horses while managing weapons and watching for threats. Cavalry charges were powerful but required discipline and coordination. Charging too early or too late weakened impact. Maintaining formation during charge was critical. Individuals breaking formation created gaps enemies could exploit. The thunder of hooves, the weight of impact when lines collided, the immediate violent chaos. All of this had to be navigated while staying aware of position, maintaining formation, protecting fellow knights. Combat itself was brutal reality, nothing like romantic stories suggested, no elegant sword duels. Real fighting was violent, exhausting, chaotic. Visibility through helmet slits was limited, hearing was muffled, communication was nearly impossible in the noise and confusion. Knights fought with training guiding them, instincts developed through years of practice, and desperate awareness that survival depended on not making mistakes. The exhaustion was overwhelming. Fighting in armor, even briefly, demanded enormous effort. After extended combat, every movement was agony. Muscles burned, breathing was labored, armor felt impossibly heavy, and knights had to keep fighting anyway, because stopping meant dying. Adrenaline helped, but only carried so far. Eventually, pure will kept bodies moving past normal limits. Knights fought in units, not as individuals. This was fundamental to survival and victory, protecting each other's flanks, covering retreats, supporting charges. Knights who'd trained together fought more effectively together. They understood each other's capabilities, could anticipate actions, worked as cohesive force. Brotherhood in battle wasn't just emotional bond, but tactical advantage. Casualties were inevitable and terrible reality. Friends fell, comrades died. The chaos of battle made it impossible to help every wounded knight. Sometimes difficult decisions had to be made. Stay to help a fallen friend or maintain formation for overall success. These decisions haunted knights afterward. Survivor's guilt was real for those who made it through when others didn't. After battle came the grim work of assessing damage. Who survived? Who fell? How severely were the wounded injured? Knights searched for friends and comrades, desperate to find them alive, dreading finding them among the dead. The relief of survival mixed with grief for losses created overwhelming emotional experience. Many knights simply collapsed from exhaustion and emotional overload once the immediate danger passed. Victory brought celebration, but also reflection. Those who survived understood they'd been fortunate. Gratitude to God was genuine. Knights believed divine protection was real and that survival wasn't purely due to skill. Some felt guilt about surviving when others didn't. Most felt profound appreciation for life, for brothers in arms who fought beside them, for simply being alive to see another day. Guige, brotherhood, bonds forged through shared experience. The brotherhood of knights wasn't abstract concept, but real, complex relationships between men who'd trained together, fought together, and lived through shared experiences, both heroic and embarrassing. These bonds were fundamental to knightly culture and essential to how the system functioned. Knights who trained as squires together often formed friendships that lasted entire lifetimes. Years of enduring same harsh training, serving under similar demanding knights, suffering through same physical punishment, created connections nothing else could replicate. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses intimately. They'd seen each other at worst moments and best. They had shared history that outsiders couldn't fully understand. The bonds extended beyond training cohorts. Knights serving same lord formed units that trained together, fought together, and socialized together. They developed internal culture, shared jokes, collective memories, understood references that made no sense to outsiders. This shared culture reinforced bonds and created sense of belonging to something larger than individual identity. Taverns were where brotherhood was often most visible. After training, after duties, after obligations were met, knights would gather to drink, talk, and relax. These weren't formal occasions but natural gatherings where hierarchies loosened somewhat and genuine friendships were expressed. Conversations flowed freely. Stories were told. Laughter was common. For a few hours they could simply be men enjoying each other's company, rather than always being knights with all that identity's weight. The stories told in taverns became legend within knightly communities. Tournament mishaps, embarrassing mistakes, unexpected victories, close calls in battle, all were recounted, embellished, and incorporated into group mythology. These weren't just entertainment, but way of processing experiences and building collective memory. The telling and retelling of stories reinforced bonds and created shared narrative. Sir Thomas featured prominently in many tavern stories. His tournament victories were genuine and impressive. His social graces were less impressive. The contrast created endless material. The time he fell asleep face first in roasted peacock at his own knighting celebration. The time he wore 7 ladies' tokens simultaneously and couldn't figure out why that was problematic. The time he bet his horse on dice game, lost, and had to borrow a horse for tournament the next day, then won the tournament anyway. Thomas's life provided entertainment for everyone who knew him. Thomas himself participated in telling these stories, showing remarkable ability to laugh at himself. Self-deprecating humor was valued among knights. Taking yourself too seriously was mocked. Knights who could acknowledge their own mistakes and find humor in them earned respect. Thomas had plenty of mistakes to acknowledge, and he treated them as contributions to community entertainment rather than sources of shame. Nicknames were another expression of brotherhood, though victims might disagree about how affectionate they were. Knights accumulated nicknames based on memorable incidents. These names stuck, sometimes for entire lifetimes, sometimes passing to descendants. Sir Falls-a-Lot had fallen from his horse once during important ceremony, and the name followed him for 40 years. Every knight had stories about how their nicknames originated, and these stories were part of community lore. The nickname culture was simultaneously cruel and affectionate. Yes, it meant being permanently reminded of embarrassing moments, but it also meant belonging to community that knew you well enough to mock you specifically. Generic insults weren't nicknames. They were just insults. True nicknames required knowing someone's history, and that knowing implied relationship and connection. Competition was constant among knights, but generally constructive. They competed in training, in tournaments, in drinking capacity, in storytelling ability, in everything. But competition existed within framework of brotherhood. Today's rival in practice yard was tomorrow's ally in battle. The competition was intense but not destructive. It pushed everyone to improve without destroying essential cooperation. Sometimes competition became problematic. 2 knights both interested in same lady could develop genuine animosity. Tournament accidents that seemed intentional. Political maneuvering that damaged careers. Brotherhood didn't mean absence of conflict, but it meant framework for managing conflict and ideally resolving it before permanent damage occurred. Support was a fundamental aspect of brotherhood. When knights faced difficulties, financial troubles, political problems, romantic disasters, grief from losses, other knights helped. Loans were extended, advice was given, solicited or not. Practical assistance was offered. This wasn't just friendship, but obligation. Knights took care of their own because that's how the system functioned. Everyone would eventually need help. Everyone provided help when asked. The bonds formed in combat were strongest and most enduring. Knights who'd fought together, protected each other, survived together, developed connections that transcended normal friendship. Combat created absolute clarity about who could be trusted. A knight who had your back in battle when death was imminent earned loyalty that lasted forever. These bonds shaped relationships for the rest of knights' lives. The aging knight, wisdom and legacy. Knights who survived to old age, and fewer did than hoped, faced transition from active warrior to elder statesman. Bodies that had served well began failing in ways that couldn't be ignored. Old injuries flared with age, reflexes slowed, strength diminished. The reality of aging as warrior was accepting that physical prime was definitively past. Morning stiffness became serious issue. Every old break, every old wound, every accumulated injury made its presence known daily. Knights developed ability to predict weather through their body's complaints. The humor about this was coping mechanism for painful reality. My shoulder says rain tomorrow. My back insists on snow. My knee guarantees we'll regret this. The jokes were dark but necessary. Sir Robert, now in his 60s after more than 40 years of service, exemplified the aging knight's experience. His body couldn't handle combat anymore. His knees hurt constantly, legacy of countless impacts and falls. His sword arm wasn't what it had been, still functional but lacking the speed and strength of youth. Training with young knights was a frustrating reminder of capabilities he'd once possessed and lost to time. But aging didn't mean irrelevance, and Robert understood this. He possessed something invaluable: experience. 4 decades of service meant he'd survived battles that killed others, navigated political situations that destroyed careers, built reputation through consistent behavior. He'd made mistakes and learned from them. He understood castle politics, regional conflicts, family alliances. Who could be trusted? This knowledge was currency. Younger knights sought his advice because his perspective was informed by actual survival. Mentoring became primary contribution. Robert took squires and taught them everything learned over decades. Not just combat technique, but life wisdom. How to navigate treacherous political waters. How to maintain honor while being practical. How to balance duty with humanity. The lessons came wrapped in stories, which was how wisdom was traditionally transmitted. "When I was your age," Robert would begin, and young knights would settle in to listen. About the Battle of Blackwater Ford, where improper formation cost 50 lives. About the tournament where Sir William died from broken lance. About the siege that lasted 6 months and what was learned about endurance. About the time Sir Thomas bet his estate on dice game and barely avoided disaster. These weren't just entertaining stories. They were survival lessons from someone who'd actually survived. The younger generation sometimes seemed less hardy to old knights. "Training was more demanding in my day. We didn't complain about bruises. This grumbling was traditional. Every generation thought the next was soft. But wise old knights like Robert remembered that their elders had said exactly the same about them. The cycle was eternal. Young knights would become old knights who'd think their successors were soft, forgetting they'd once been called soft themselves. Physical limitations were frustrating, but had to be accepted gracefully. Unable to fight didn't mean useless. Strategy and planning benefited enormously from experience. Diplomacy and negotiation were skills that improved with age and understanding of human nature. Administration and justice were roles where wisdom mattered more than strength. Robert adapted to contributions matching his current capabilities rather than mourning lost abilities. Legacy became increasingly important consideration. What would be remembered after death? How would family reputation be affected by one's life? Robert looked at his sons, both knights now, both serving honorably, with deep satisfaction. His legacy would continue through them. His grandson, currently a page, would someday be knight as well. 4 generations of knights in one family line. The pride in that continuity was profound. Children and grandchildren carried legacy forward in tangible ways. The values taught, the examples set, the reputation built, all of this passed to next generation. Good knights created opportunities for their descendants. Poor knights burdened their families with damaged reputations. Robert had built something worth inheriting, and that knowledge provided comfort as age advanced. Stories told about deceased knights kept their memory alive in community. "Remember Sir William, bravest man I knew." Robert would tell the story again about William charging into enemy lines to rescue a fallen comrade, succeeding but dying from wounds afterward. The repeated telling ensured William's courage was remembered. His example taught to new generations. This was immortality available to knights, being remembered and honored by community long after death. As Robert approached his final years, he faced death without overwhelming fear. He'd lived according to knightly code as well as imperfect human could. He'd served faithfully. He'd fought bravely when required. He'd raised good sons. He'd mentored dozens of young knights. He'd contributed to his community meaningfully. His reputation was secure. His legacy was established. Death would come when God willed it, and Robert was ready. He'd had a good run, not perfect, with regrets and mistakes certainly, but overall good. That was enough. Conclusion. The meaning of knighthood. Being a medieval knight was extraordinarily demanding. The training was brutal. The responsibilities were heavy. The combat was terrifying. The expectations were constant. Life was lived under scrutiny where honor and reputation mattered more than almost anything else, and where a single serious mistake could destroy everything built over years. But it was also deeply meaningful. Knighthood provided clear purpose: protect the weak, uphold justice, serve faithfully. It offered genuine brotherhood, bonds forged through shared training, shared danger, shared commitment to ideals larger than self. It gave social respect earned through demonstrated capability and adherence to code. It created legacy that could last beyond individual lifetime. Knights weren't perfect. They were humans with flaws, weaknesses, and failings, but they strove toward ideals that elevated behavior beyond mere self-interest. Even when failing to fully achieve those ideals, the striving itself created social structure that benefited communities. Knights who tried to be honorable, even while sometimes falling short, were better than knights who didn't try at all. The modern world doesn't have knights anymore, but we have people who serve: soldiers, first responders, people who dedicate themselves to protecting others and serving communities. Different context, different specific challenges, but similar core: dedication to duty, courage in face of danger, service to something beyond oneself, bonds with those who share the burden. Thank you for joining this journey into what medieval knighthood really meant. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, the training, the responsibilities, the brotherhood, the reality, please subscribe to see more explorations of the past. There are many more fascinating stories waiting to be told, many more historical truths waiting to be discovered. Let's continue exploring together.